Peace, family. It's your brother, Blak, and welcome back to the second part of Agent Jesse Jackson, the heir apparent. In part one, we discussed the King years. We discussed Jackson's introduction to activism amidst CORE, as well as his sponsorship by the Chancellor of A&T University, William DeWitt Proctor, as well as his sponsorship from Democratic Governor of North Carolina, Terry Sanford. His initial introduction to King's assassination, and Jackson's actions following the immediate aftermath of the King assassination. In part two, we will be discussing Jackson's time in Chicago, as well as his international playerism and his unsuccessful campaign runs for the United States presidency. All right, let's get into this.
COINTELPRO ain't dead. Don't think you screaming Black Power, putting in work for the people and not getting watched. Shit, it's agents in here right now. You might not know who it is, but we gon' speak to them anyway. Follow my lead. Yeah. Somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. Just say hi, FBI. Yeah, somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. Just say hi, FBI. Yo, somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. Teaching black people. Just say hi, FBI. Yeah, somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. You don't think they got that? Bye, FBI. Yeah. Somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. Just say hi, FBI. Shit. Somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. Click, clack, bye, bye, FBI.
Following the death of Dr. King, Jesse would continue to work with the SCLC. He began to clash with its leader and King's appointed successor, Ralph Abernathy. In 1969, the New York Times published an article in his paper titled "Chicago's Operation Breadbasket is Seeking Racial Solutions and Economic Problems," reported that several black leaders viewed Jackson as King's successor, and that Jackson was one of the few black activists who was preaching racial reconciliation. Not sure who these leaders were, but according to the New York Times, they were black leaders. They didn't give no names or nothing like that. They just said black leaders. But okay. 1969 will be the same year Jackson would meet a 12-year-old Al Sharpton and take on a mentorship role with Sharpton and appoint him to serve as the youth director of the New York City branch of Operation Breadbasket. Al Sharpton would then go on to become an FBI informant before establishing the National Action Network, which has its headquarters in Harlem, USA. That year, he would also meet a man named Frank Watkins, a 30-year-old former pastor who could not find a church that would have him, so he began to volunteer for Operation Breadbasket late spring of that year. And him and Jackson would form a lifelong friendship, with Frank Watkins being considered Jesse Jackson's right-hand man. Now, there's no real history on Frank Watkins. I can't really find out a whole lot about the guy, except that he was a pastor and basically couldn't find a church that would accept him or allow him to preach. So he ended up volunteering for Operation Breadbasket a year after King was assassinated, and would go on to become Jackson's future speechwriter. Yeah, that guy right there used to write Jesse Jackson speeches. Frank Watkins. But anyway, around the same time on the Chicago political scene was a young, charismatic leader of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, none other than Chairman Fred Hampton. And although the two were contemporaries of each other who ran in complete different circles, Jesse admired Fred Hampton's Rainbow Coalition approach. The Rainbow Coalition was a 1960s alliance in Chicago led by Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party, uniting racial ethnic groups, the Black Panthers, Young Lords, and Young Patriots, against poverty, police brutality, and systemic injustice. The two would meet briefly through Bobby Rush, the co-founder of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. I'm not exactly sure of how long Rush and Jackson actually knew each other or when they even officially met. But it wouldn't be until later that year in December, after the assassination of Fred Hampton, who was assassinated by the Chicago Police Department by orders of the FBI after his bodyguard, William O'Neill, who was a police informant, drugged Chairman Fred after delivering floor plans of the layout of Chairman Fred Hampton's home to the Chicago Police Department. Immediately afterward, a warrant was issued for the arrest of Bobby Rush, who would later go on to hold the congressional seat in Illinois from 1993 until 2023. Now, I'm not exactly sure who reached out to who. Bobby Rush has never actually given a detailed account of these events, but he has credited Jesse Jackson with saving his life during this incident, where Jackson brokered a deal with the Chicago Police Department for Bobby Rush's safe surrender at the headquarters of Operation Breadbasket in the Chicago office. After the incident, Bobby Rush would shy away from the Black Panther Party and its politics, go on to get degrees from Roosevelt University as well as the University of Illinois, and there go on to have a 30-year run in the House of Representatives. Pretty impressive. So Jackson was able to foster a deal between fugitive Black Panther and co-founder of the Illinois chapter, Bobby Rush's quote-unquote safe surrender with the police. So he was negotiating with the police and the Panthers. Oh, this boy's slick. And days later, he would deliver the eulogy at the funeral of Chairman Fred Hampton. So once again, in the immediate aftermath of the assassination of a potential Black Messiah, we find Jesse Jackson positioning himself as their successor. Jackson, without missing a beat, will begin forging alliances with the several different street gangs on the Chicago scene, with his strongest ties to Jeff Fort of the Black Keystone Rangers. Jackson had been working with Fort and the gang as early as 1968, whether it was having them work on picket lines or working for security. Jackson had become this ubiquitous leader who had relationships with politicians, police officers, Black Panthers, and now street gangs. Slain Panther Chairman Fred Hampton and Jeff Fort had previously held a pretty good relationship, with Fred Hampton trying to create an alliance between the organizations. However, that would all go south due to the FBI's antagonism when informant William O'Neill provoked an armed battle between the two organizations, bringing the two organizations at odds with each other. In the direct aftermath of Fred Hampton's assassination, as 1969 will come to an end, the Chicago street gangs, the Vice Lords, the Black Keystone Nation, and the Gangster Disciples all created an alliance known as the LSD Alliance, which stood for Lords, Stones, and Disciples, which was led by Vice Lord Chief Bobby Gore, Keystone Nation leader Jeff Fort, and Black Gangster Disciple leaders Larry Hoover and David Barksdale, which was formed on the heels of the assassination of Fred Hampton, with the several different street gangs coming to the realization that the enemy is the police. So now Fred Hampton is gone, and the street gangs on their own initiative have decided to come together as desired by Fred Hampton, and here comes Jesse throwing himself as the next Fred Hampton, inserting himself as their moral authority in some sort of sense. And just as Jackson was strengthening his stronghold in Chicago, his relationship with the SCLC had begun to deteriorate. In spring of 1971, Abernathy ordered Jackson to move the National Office of Operation Breadbasket from Chicago to Atlanta, but Jackson refused to move. And in October of that year, Jackson will organize the Blak Expo in Chicago, which was a trade and business fair to promote black capitalism and grassroots political power. The 5-day event was attended by black businesses from 40 states, as well as politicians such as Cleveland Mayor Carl Stokes and Chicago Mayor Richard J. Daley. That's right, the same Richard J. Daley that Jackson was introduced to by South Carolina Governor Terry Sanford, and the same Richard J. Daley that greenlit the execution of Fred Hampton. Look at them two. Look at them. All chummy and buddy. Like old pals. They even look like teammates. But okay, let's continue. The expo was a success with Jackson's assertion that green power is the way to black power. He also employed several members of the Keystone Rangers as security for not just the event, but as the personal security of some of the celebrities who had attended the event, such as the Jackson 5. And I must admit, employ might be the wrong word to use because they actually didn't get paid, which created a problem because not only were they not getting paid for their services, but they were also owed federal funded money via Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, which led to threats made by the Stones against Jackson and his peoples, which at the time still extended to the SCLC. Jackson would then reach out to a friend and former Chicago police detective W.L. Lillard, who ran the Lillard Security Company, for protection. Shortly after, Reverend Curtis Bureau was approached at the Woodland Mennonite Church by members of the Keystone Nation, where Bureau was threatened and forced to pull out a gun, letting off 3 shots toward the ground to escape the confrontation. Later that evening, the Woodlawn Mennonite Church would be set on fire. Burrell would meet with Jackson, who would then put Burrell in touch with W.L. Lillard. What happened next would ultimately set in motion the destruction of the LSD Alliance. You gotta understand what was going on at this time in Chicago with the street organizations, especially directly after the death of Fred Hampton. A lot of these organizations have become politicized and were even created off of the principles of defending the community. The Lords, led by Bobby Gore, focused on community outreach and legitimate business development. The Black Keystones, led by Jeff Fort, provided massive numbers and utilized federal funding for job training programs. And the Black Gangster Disciples, led by Larry Hoover and David Barksdale, represented the tactical strength and discipline. Jackson and Burrell would go on the offense, aligning themselves with a coalition of black ministers and the Black Men Move organization led by John Barber, and would officially declare their own war on the street gangs of Chicago. They would go as far as to have W.L. Lillard escort Reverend Curtis Bureau to the Cook County State Attorney's Office of Edward Hanrahan, the same Edward Hanrahan who was directly involved with the cold-blooded killing of Black Panther chairman Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. So here you have these black ministers who recently went to the government and vouched for these gangs and articulated how these gangs can become an asset to the community with proper funding, are now going to the government and law enforcement to talk about how dangerous these gangs are and how they are in fact terrorizing the black community. Now remember, Jesse Jackson is still a member of the SCLC technically. So word gets back to Abernathy. And Abernathy then comes to Chicago to mediate the dispute and pretty much pays them back their money. I believe they said it was to the tune of $80,000. This would ultimately lead to Abernathy suspending Jackson, which would then cause Jackson to split from the SCLC. Al Sharpton, the group's youth leader of the SCLC, would leave the organization to protest Jackson's treatment and go on to form the National Youth Movement. Come in, Jesse. Jackson and his entire Breadbasket staff, along with 30 of the 35 board members, resigned from the SCLC and began planning a new organization, with Time magazine quoting Jesse Jackson as saying, at the time, the civil rights movement had lost its offensive thrust, which would lead to the forming of a new organization, People United to Save Humanity, also known as Operation Push, which Jackson would later change the name to People United to Serve Humanity. Officials at the SCLC reportedly felt the new organization would help black businesses more than it would help black poor people.
We know who our parents are. Their baby has now been born. We are grown. We ain't taking it no more. No more yes-abounds. No more bowing and scraping. We are 25 million strong. Cut us in or cut it out. It is a new ball game.
And just 4 months after Jackson split from the SCLC, he would be invited to be a keynote speaker at Nation Time, which was a 2-day national black political convention held in Gary, Indiana.
In the name of Nat Turner, Sojourner Truth, Mary McLeod Bethune, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Martin King. What time is it? When we come together, what time is it? When we respect each other, what time is it? When we get ourselves confident, what time is it? When we form our own political party, what time is it?
The event was a landmark gathering with approximately 10,000 black people convened to discuss a unified black agenda and political self-determination, which would be a strong showing of solidarity between the black nationalists, the revolutionary fraction, and the integration and civil rights fraction. The event was like 1972's ultimate black power pep rally, with different celebrities such as Harabella Fonte, comedian Dick Gregory, poet Amiri Baraka, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s widow Coretta Scott King, as well as the widow of our great shining prince Malcolm X, Dr. Betty Shabazz, who in fact introduced Jesse Jackson as our new black leader of the time.
But introduce to you one of the most dynamic leaders today, Jesse Jackson, National President of PUSH.
Also attending the convention was Black Panther Party co-founder and chairman Bobby Seale, who was in fact introduced by Jesse Jackson at the event.
About just a simple, stupid desire to kill nobody. Revolution is about the right for humanity and black people in this country here and across the world to survive. Revolution is about your humanity. You are black and beautiful and you are human beings. You, brothers and sisters, people, are the boss. You are the boss. But you tell us what you want and what you need and what you better have.
Look at Bobby up there talking that yo, daddy, yo, what you know. The event itself was considered a grassroots funded event with no funding from any particular one private source. Allegedly, the event will ultimately be Jackson's coming out party. The purpose of the convention was to push for a black political party. Little is mentioned about what was actually achieved at the convention, but the defining moments did include the Gary Declaration, a powerful manifesto stating that the American political system was failing black citizens and calling for radical fundamental changes, as well as the National Black Agenda, which was a 60-page document published on May 19th, Malcolm X's birthday, 1972, outlining demands such as reparations, a guaranteed minimum income, proportionate representation in Congress, and an end to the Vietnam War, and the creation of a national black political assembly. And here we are, just 54 years later. Despite the initial euphoria of unity without conformity, the coalition faced significant internal tensions, ideology rifts between integrationists who favor working with the Democratic Party and separatists who wanted that independent power, which led elected officials to distance themselves from the more radical planks of the Gary agenda. So what was actually accomplished by the convention yet remains to be seen. However, there was a film that was made by William Greaves, which was released that same year, called Nation Time. I guess, they did make some money off of it somewhere. And you can check it out, too, on YouTube. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, a reconciliation between Fort and Jackson would be made. But by then, Senator McClellan, Mayor Daley, and State Attorney Edward Hanrahan had already launched their war on Chicago gangs. And although gang violence in the streets was at an all-time low at the moment, this intensified effort to eradicate the street gangs of Chicago ultimately led to the dissolving of the LSD Alliance. 1972, Jeff Fort would be convicted for the misuse of federal funds from the job program. While in prison, Fort and Jesse Jackson's half-brother Noah Robinson will form a secret partnership. Robinson was brought to Chicago by his brother Jesse Jackson in 1969 to become a full-time director of the commercial division of Operation Breadbasket, which is where he was able to learn the infrastructure and meet all the top players within the city of Chicago. Noah Robinson was a very successful businessman on his own. He had a line of fast food restaurants. I believe it was a few Wendy's he owned. He was in the real estate, and he was also a minority subcontractor who was able to take advantage of the minority set-aside money from the Nixon administration. He would take money that was for the development of black businesses and give them to white contractors, and charging them a percent for that, which would then allow them to receive the contracts. So Jesse really put his brother in position with this one. And after serving 2 years on his 5-year sentence, the Black Peace Stone Ranger leader, who had now changed the name of his organization to the El Rukins, had been released from prison. Jackson, and what he will call his efforts in attempt to redeem Jeff Fort, will go as far as baptizing the newly Moorish American Science member. And once again, Jackson would use the El Rukins as his unofficial security force. In 1975, 2 Chicago news reporters, Barbara A. Reynolds and Angela Parker, would be forced to leave the city due to threats on their life from the El Rukins after printing unfavorable articles about Jackson. Now, if you remember, Reynolds is the one who wrote the book about Jackson, where she revealed that there was no record of him being arrested. The arrest that supposedly got Governor Terry Sanford's attention. And although Jackson and Fort would continue to work together, by the end of the decade, the LSD Gang Alliance had completely dissolved, with Bobby Gore being incarcerated, as well as Larry Hoover and the death of David Barksdale. In 1983, El Rukin chief Jeff Fort was convicted for drug trafficking. Fort would continue to run his organization with help of Noah Robinson Jr. Robinson would introduce the El Rukins to Thomas Allen Burnside, a.k.a. Blue, a childhood friend of Robinson's who operated a major cocaine and heroin distribution network on the East Coast. Prosecutors were right. With Robinson's drug connections, the gang was able to expand and reap huge profits. Robinson would launder hundreds of thousands of dollars of drug money through his legit businesses. And in 1989, Robinson himself would be convicted for soliciting the murder of a childhood friend whom he recently had a fight with. Also for soliciting the murder of a witness to that crime and the attempt murder of another rival. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, he was released in 2017 at the age of 80 years old. He passed shortly after. Jackson would later say he promised his father, Noah Sr., before he would pass in 2006, that he would make a deal to get Noah released. Jeff Fort, while serving his 13 years for drug trafficking, in 1987 will be charged and convicted of conspiring with Libya to perform acts of domestic terrorism. He was sentenced to 80 years in prison to be carried out consecutive to his drug sentencing. And today, Jeff Fort is at ADX Florence Supermax Prison in Florence, Colorado, where he has remained there for the past 20 years with no human contact. By the early 80s, Jackson's influence had begun to grow internationally, and in 1983, he would go visit Syria and sit down with Syrian President Hafez al-Assad and secure the release of captured American pilot Robert Goodman. It was reported that Jackson made a dramatic personal appeal to the President Assad. Afterwards, President Ronald Reagan would invite Jackson to the White House along with Robert Goodman. This move would help boost Jackson's popularity as a patriot and served as a springboard for his 1984 presidential run. In 1984, he had his famous first run at the United States presidency. His campaign was ran by longtime friend and supporters Frank Watkins, who by this time was considered Jesse's go-to man, and of course, longtime affiliate and Chicago veteran strategist and consultant Don Rose was there to guarantee he got the necessary press he needed. And in support of his presidential campaign, he would also launch his own version of the Rainbow Coalition, which he named the Rainbow Coalition. Its goal was to build a coalition of diverse groups, minorities, women, LGBT plus individuals and workers, to increase voter registration and amplify unheard voices. The movement is credited with paving the way for future leaders like Barack Obama and shifting the Democratic Party toward a more inclusive and progressive platform. This same year, Jackson will become an early advocate for gay rights, stating that gays and lesbians are part of the fabric that make up the quilt of America. He would go on to lose the Democratic nomination to Walter Mondale that year. Although presidential aspirations may have been cut short, he continued his international crusade, and on June 1984, Jackson would visit Cuba. He would meet with Fidel Castro, during which visit, Jackson would negotiate the release of 22 Americans being held captive. In 1987, once again with Frank Watkins running his campaign, Jesse would announce his bid for the 1988 presidential election. He would also bring along his longtime colleague, Gary Massoni, to take charge of his scheduling. This time he did much better, however, still losing the Democratic nomination, this time to Michael Dukakis. Jackson would continue his international activism, and in 1991, on the eve of the Persian Gulf War, Jackson would go to Iraq, sit down with Saddam Hussein for the release of foreign nationals held as human shields. Again, he would secure the release of 20 Americans and several Brits. So wow, Jesse is going to all these different countries with hostile relations towards America and getting these hostages released. Whose objective was he operating under? Who was sanctioning all of this? We're talking about hostile nations, which in most cases were absolute no-fly zones at the time, unless you had some type of special permission. So the question is, who was granting him permission to go over there? Who was he working for? Was he going over there just to get the hostages, going over there maybe trying to check the temperature of some of these leaders and what's going on so he can come back and report? Or was he just on some noble mission and by the grace of God, he was able to charter a plane to go to these nations and speak to the head of their states and secure the return of hostages on multiple occasions? Under what type of protection was he able to go over there, or what type of insurance? Was he just going over there risking his life? It kind of reminds me of Frank Lucas and his fantastic tales about going over into Vietnam, into the jungles, while America was at war with Vietnam, and finding some Vietnamese drug lords that owned all of these poppy fields that was able to process the heroin for them and all that other foolishness, which, come to find out the whole time, it was a whole goddamn CIA operation being ran. And speaking of the CIA, after strongly opposing George Bush during his run, Jackson and the newly elected president and former head of the CIA, George Bush, would hold a surprisingly warm relationship, which George H.W. Bush claimed he's always admired Jackson's ability to embolden people to believe in themselves from as early as their first meeting in 1971. And to this day, the Bush and Jackson family maintain ties. Yeah, don't let the political theater fool you. These are old friends here. I mean, look at the smile on their face. Have you ever seen George Bush smile this hard before? Like, for real, this is one of the, George Bush always had that stoic appearance. When you look at him right here, he just seems so thrilled and happy to be embracing with his good friend Jesse Jackson. So they met in 1971. Sounds about the same time George Bush was working for the CIA. Not that I know the actual nature of their relationship. I'm just saying. All right, I'm going to end this right about here. There's at least a good 30 years worth that I could keep on going with this guy. But let's just do a quick recap now. Beginning with King's death and the immediate aftermath. According to testimony from the 1999 wrongful death lawsuit, which was won by the King family against Lloyd Jowers, the owner of Jim's Grill, a restaurant located right beneath the room that James Earl Ray had rented, Ron Atkins, son of Dixie Mafia head honcho Russell Atkins Sr., testified that it was Jesse Jackson who had Dr. King's room changed from 202 to 306, exposing King for a perfect view for the sniper's shot. He will further go on to testify that Jesse Jackson, along with Reverend Billy Kyles, Solomon Jones, and Memphis businessman O.Z. Evers were all paid informants on the scene of the King assassination. So King just had a whole bunch of suckers within his mix. After miraculously being able to leave Memphis for Chicago the night of the assassination of King, Jesse Jackson with press secretary Don Rose, who was initially King's press secretary, and directly after King's death, suddenly he was arranging for Jesse Jackson, who, like I stated in the first episode, wasn't the third, fourth, or even fifth man on the totem pole when it came to the SCLC. But yet he ended up being the one to get all the press and to get all the TV appearances provided by Don Rose. Then while in Chicago, we seen him try to forge a relationship with Black Panther Party chairman Fred Hampton, who Fred Hampton at the time was creating a movement of unity amongst the gangs and other organizations within Chicago. After the assassination of Fred Hampton, we see him then try to completely usurp Fred Hampton's work in Chicago, aligning himself with Jeff Fort, even going as far as to jack the whole idea of the Rainbow Coalition. And here we could see, not only did he jack the name of the Rainbow Coalition, but he even tried to jack my man whole style.
That I am a revolutionary, and you're gonna have to keep on saying that.
Somebody! Talk about watered down. This dude is Diet Coke for real. We seen the Black Power Hyper Bowl event Nation Time, which was the coming out party for Jesse Jackson. With its agenda and bold declarations, we seen it produce absolutely nothing but a documentary you can watch on YouTube.
Of one party, I don't want to be a part of the gray shadow of the white donkey. I am 21, it is 72. I am a black man, I want a black party. I do not trust white Republicans or white Democrats.
But we know Jesse's been a Democrat since at least 1961, going back to his mentor, Terry Sanford. Yeah, he must have been talking about the after party. Jesse Jackson's relationship with law enforcement. He seemed to have every Illinois police officer as well as politician in his Rolodex. I mean, it's pretty fantastic at the fact that here we have Bobby Rush on the run from the police, a fugitive after the assassination of Fred Hampton, the brutal, vicious, cold-blooded assassination of Fred Hampton. And here, Jesse Jackson is able to make a phone call and smooth everything over for a safe surrender for Bobby Rush at the Operation Push headquarters. So was he able to just call in a favor from Mayor Daley? He was literally the linchpin that connected Reverend Burrell and Reverend Barber, District Attorney Hanrahan, and Senator McClellan to go after the LSD gang alliance by having his police friend W.L. Lillard, Tate Curtis, and Burrell to meet with Attorney General Hanrahan as well as super racist Senator McClellan, who then teamed up with Jackson's old friend Chicago Mayor Daley to go after the street gangs of Chicago, ultimately destroying the LSD alliance. But only after running up an $80,000 tab with Jeff Fort and the Peace Stones. 1 minute the man says he doesn't trust a white Republican or a white Democrat. The next minute he tirelessly campaigned for Jimmy Carter's re-election, showing his dedication as well as his loyalty in all 32 of his teeth. The dubious relationships he holds with Mayor Daley or District of Attorney Hanrahan, who had his fingerprints all over the Fred Hampton assassination. His relationship with George Wallace, who became his advisor while running for president of the United States in '84. This is the same George Wallace who was the governor of Alabama during Bloody Sunday. But for me, the final straw was when he went and threatened the anatomy of black people's political lord and savior, Barack Hussein Obama. Too far
talking down to black people on those faith-based
and when Barack Obama won the presidency, you could see Jesse celebrating with tears of joy. Or were those tears of agony? I mean, it sure must have been hard watching the new and improved version of you come up out of Chicago and take that spot you coveted for so long but was never able to reach. Look at this bitch. Now, I'll be the first to admit, it's easy to sit back from the position that I'm in to criticize and critique those in the struggle for black liberation of yesterday. But I will also be the first to tell you, nobody's above criticism. But we need to make the distinction between a poor choice and a dubious decision. And again, I am your brother, Che Blak. I am not here to make up your mind for you. Just present the evidence. Feel free to leave your opinion in the comments. If you enjoyed my work, please like and subscribe. And until next time, this was the conclusion to Agent Jesse Jackson, the heir apparent. And stay tuned. The next episode of Agent will be dropping very soon.
COINTELPRO ain't dead. Don't think you screaming black power, putting in work for the people and not getting watched. Shit, it's agents in here right now. You might not know who it is, but we gon' speak to them anyway. Follow my lead. Yeah.
Somebody in here's an agent. Somebody in here's an agent. Just say hi, FBI. Just say hi, FBI.